I'm Karen Harman. I'm a psychologist down in York, Maine, which I've learned recently, or that I'm not really a Mainer, that I live in northern Massachusetts. I'm not originally from here. I'm from Washington, D.C., so to me and my family, I'm a true Mainer. My license plate has Maine on it. They think I live in the backwoods of Maine, when really it's York. So, but that's where my practice is. I just want to kind of start and say how humbled I am. Always when I'm speaking to law enforcement, I mean, it's very humbling to be up here as a psychologist in front of people who are willing to literally put their lives in harm's way for the sake of other people. I still can't wrap my head around that. And again, being up here to be able to sort of bridge that gap between mental health and those who do that job is an honor. So thank you for that. A little bit about my background is I was in the military for 7 years. I was in the Navy as a psychologist, which is kind of what brought me here. When I got out of the Navy, and I was an operational psychologist, so that's a whole nother kind of field that I can talk about, but I'm more excited about it than you would be. But I was an operational psychologist, and when I got out of the Navy, I opened my practice, and I was working with clients in a private practice setting, which is great. I was enjoying it. I had my 2 babies and doing the work. And there was a need for a clinician on the York County peer support team for law enforcement. And it sparked my interest. And so I joined the York County peer support team and went to my first meeting. And I had been going, with other clinical psychologists to conferences, and I just never felt, I always felt out of place without those who didn't work for the military. I just always felt out of place. And then I went to my first law enforcement meeting with law enforcement officers, and I think immediately, one of the attendees threw a spitball at the instructor. There was discussion of bowel movements and all this stuff, and immediately I felt at home. I was back with my people, and so that's sort of taken on a life of its own now. In my practice now, I only pretty much work with law enforcement, very much as a consultant to agencies at this point and teaching like this. And like I said, with my military background, I feel like I have that ability to bridge the gap between you guys, people who, when you see someone like us, usually don't want to talk to us. In fact, a lot of law enforcement's first experience with a mental health professional is adversarial because they're doing a psych eval on you. Your first experience before you become a law enforcement officer is to do a psych eval and then your polygraph. And we can decide whether or not you're fit for duty or whether or not you're going to get the job. So that's your experience. So no wonder you don't want to speak to us. And there's many other reasons you don't want to either. The same reasons like when you tell people you're in law enforcement and they have a weird reaction to that, we have that same experience. So for some reason, I'm drawn to working with people who don't really like us, and I don't know why that is, but I'll address that in my own therapy. So the elephant in the room is the fact that we are mental health professionals, and I get that. So I'm just going to put it out there. Not all of us are, lighting incense in our office and holding hands and singing Kumbaya. That's what I'm here to tell you. Not all of us are doing that. So what are the barriers? So Dr. Green, Steve, you talked about the macro barriers, all the political stuff. So I'm not going to get into that. But that, first and foremost, if people supported you, if they did their jobs, if they were held accountable, if the criminal justice system, if the jails, if the court system, if the mental health facilities could keep people, and it wasn't a revolving door, you guys could do your job better. You wouldn't need wellness per se. But that's what I hear a lot when I work with guys and gals, is that it's not the job, it's all this other stuff. But anyways, the barriers to taking care of yourself. Just the culture, I hear it all the time. Suck it up, buttercup, right? I hear that all the time, and I understand that. And actually, I don't disagree with it. I don't think it can't coexist with what we're talking about. There is a time and a place to suck it up, buttercup, and that's when you're on the job. I want you to. I don't want you breaking down at a scene, for sure. But where I don't want you sucking it up, buttercup, is when you're at home and when you're off duty. And that's kind of what Steve and Celia and I are talking about, the dial and different ways to do that. A lot of what I hear from guys and gals, especially those of you in federal, is that your security clearances could be compromised, that you're gonna get your gun and your badge taken if you go to talk to someone like us. And when I was working in the military, especially with pilots, there was a big thing about no psych meds, no therapy. It would hurt their flight status. What we now do, the Navy's come a long way with air crew in promoting psychological health, and the reality is that whatever behavior or psychological issue that you're not addressing is going to get you into more trouble than if you see someone like us. So that's kind of how I like to frame it to people. I get there's that fear there. Another barrier, bureaucracy that Steve talked about, I'm not going to get into that, but all the red tape, all the paperwork, the red tape, the stuff that undermines your ability to do your job. There's no time. Even if you wanted to, even if today you took home all these tools and you loved what we're talking about, when are you gonna do it? Because your operation turnaround is so quick, or overtime and undermanning, all those things. Is there even time to decompress? I don't need to tell you guys about sleep deprivation. Again, that's like the number one thing. Again, none of this matters if you haven't gotten at least regularly 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Most people I talk to are getting 4 to 6, and that's more than they're getting 7 to 9 hours. And so if you're irritable or grumpy or not processing things, there's a good reason why. You hear a lot of what this job does to you. What this job does to you, it's the job does it, the job changes you. And while that is true, what I've noticed and what I really like to talk about is that people who choose this work, there's something already different about you. Not in a bad way, but when we do those psych evals, we want your profiles to look a little bit, so like when you take the MMPI or the PAI, whatever million questions you fill in the bubbles, we want you to be a little bit thrill-seeking, adventure-seeking, a little bit crazy, balanced with a little bit of neuroses that holds you enough to follow rules. So a little bit of obsessiveness coupled with that thrill-seeking is the perfect law enforcement officer. You guys are different. There's something that you went into this job for. There's a reason you chose that work, whether it's the service of others. You're in the helping profession. A lot of you describe being type A and light control and really, really loyal and dedicated to family. Very intense individuals that helps you do your job greatly. And then when you're working, it just reinforces that. So what were you like when you came in? That could potentially be a barrier. And like I'm saying, your training and operational requirements directly conflict with psychological health. Your training and operational requirements directly conflict with self-care. Being vigilant all the time, having your head on a swivel. How does that work out well when you're out to dinner with your spouse, sitting in the back corner, noticing where all the exits are? So I remember I was at with the state police, the tactical team training where they're learning room clearing, which makes sense. And I remember the guy who was training them said, okay, when you go home tonight and you cross a threshold into your kitchen, practice this maneuver. And in my head, just observing that, I can imagine these guys at home practicing tactical maneuvers. And again, it's just, you don't normally enter a kitchen that way. That's not normal. So the other piece, and I will say a lot of my experience is with state and local law enforcement, less so with specifically those who work in crimes against children and CSAM. But what I know and what I'm learning about your profession is it's a quietly serving profession, that it's not as glamorous or seductive or out there in the open, knocking down doors, or some of you are, but there's a quietness about it, and that doesn't get recognized, and maybe doesn't get recognized for the need for help. Sort of sometimes a marginalized community within your agency, depending on where you work. But the fact that you're here today, the fact that you're here, someone's looking out for you. Somebody thinks this is important. So that's a good thing. That's a sign that we're in the right direction. Some myths, I've already touched upon it, but what are some of the myths about seeking mental health treatment in the law enforcement community? I already mentioned it will negatively affect my career. Self-care is selfish. Calm is unsafe. It's too late for me. I know so many people, maybe right now, are sitting here like, that's great, but I'm 30 years in, and I wish they had this 20 years ago. I hear that all the time. This is a big one. We call it like comparative trauma. My stuff isn't as bad as his or her, so why am I affected this way? I've had guys, back in the military, like amputees. I only lost one leg. He lost his leg and his arm. At what point, there were battle stories, and I hear that a lot. Why are we here today? Like I mentioned, the mindset that keeps you safe on the job wreaks havoc on your life. And that was a quote from Dr. Kevin Gilmartin. If any of you have not read Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, a lot of chiefs kind of make their new hires read it. At the academy, actually, they've started doing that. So I would definitely, it's in the reading list in your packets, but today we want to introduce the idea of psychological health and resilience. Frankly, your job is so out of control, whether it's waiting for a call, you don't get a choice in that. This is the only thing we have control over, so getting control back. Also to convince you, kind of like Steve said, that you can do your job, or you can take care of yourself without compromising your tactical mindset and your skills. I think that's sort of hard to navigate. We need you now more than ever. We need you to be healthy in many ways. We don't want to lose you. And when I say that, lose you, whether that's you lose your identity in this work, lose you to taking your life, whatever that is, lose you. We don't want to lose you to this work. And we're also here to debunk some of those myths. And I have there on the bottom, if none of those work, if all else fails, if we can just get you to like us just a little bit, then we've done our job. Because remember I mentioned, like, a lot of people don't have a response to mental health professionals. And if I can just get you to like me, like Steve and Celia, who you will like, then we're one step closer to access, where you guys are more likely to see someone like me or like us in the future. So the myths I was talking about, self-care is selfish. Self-care has been around for a long time. Actually started with Aristotle, where he said you have to practice happiness coupled with a space for negative emotions. He understood that happiness didn't just come, but you have to actually practice it even if you're not. The other piece is, I know it's overused, but you have to fill your cup before you can serve others. The whole airplane, put on your mask before you can put on your children's mask. I used to think that was the meanest thing. Why would an adult put on their mask first? And I realize, obviously, that you can't do your job until you take care of yourself. So self-care, selfish, self-care doesn't have to mean, getting facials and getting your nails done. We're talking about soul care for your soul. Calm is unsafe. I kind of agree that kind of like that suck it up buttercup thing. I agree. In the moment, we need you in a certain arousal level in your nervous system to do your job, because that's what you're trained to do. So we need you there. And that keeps you safe on the job. But when you're at home, it's believing that you are safe. How do we get you to believe that you are safe enough to downshift? And that's tricky. The career thing I already talked about, the behaviors that you're not treating will likely be more prominent and affect your career more than it would that you documented that you saw a mental health professional. Too late for me, it's not too late. It's never too late. The best time was before you started this career, but it's never too late to implement these things. And also, I hear a lot of people say, and it's fine if you're here for the younger generation, that's great. If it's not for me, but it's for my guys. I hear that all the time. Fine, if that's what you're here for, then you absorb it too and teach it to other people. So you can help us do our work for us. Help get your guys to like us. And then my stuff isn't as bad as his or hers. I mean, and Celia and Steve will talk more about just the science of the nervous system that Trauma is trauma, no matter what it is. We don't know what is bad. What is the measure of bad? Was it the person who, saw the thing actually happen, or was it the person on the perimeter? We just can't know all those details. And if you're having a hard time, it doesn't matter how close you were to the incident. There's so many other factors in that. But that is something we have to address, is that comparative piece. Why am I struggling? I was only on the perimeter. I mentioned that psychological health is not a new concept. I talked about Aristotle, so it's not like a new thing. I think we think of it as like this progressive, new, fluffy. Yoga's great, but it's not always that. And for me, I don't know why, I always tie this in. I think of the POW as just my background as a little specialty in the psychology of captivity. I worked at the Survive, Evade, Resist, and Escape school in the military, so teaching people how to survive captivity if they're ever caught or captured in enemy territory. Part of what we teach is how to survive captivity and really mindset and resilience and all those things. And I know you might be saying, we're not POWs. This isn't that situation. How can you compare that, right? That comparative thing. We're not as bad as them. But frankly, POWs, or hostages, that their situation is so dire that all they can do is take care of themselves. It's very clear. For you guys, where it's accumulation, chronic, ongoing thing, the situation isn't as clear that you need to take care of yourself. It doesn't seem as dire, so there's less motivation to do it. So let us help you with that part. Let us help you with that. And they're really, if you're ever interested, I love talking about, there's example after example of what different POWs did, really unique stories that stand out. A lot of them have written books about how they survive captivity, and it's really, really cool. And a lot of it is about getting control back, because we know when your control's taken away, that's the epitome of a stressful situation, and your job has actually a lot of that. Lack of predictability, lack of control, unpredictable things happen. It's happening now. So loss of control, that's the primary psychological torture for someone, and so getting control back. So I kind of thought in my head, like the perfect storm, it seems like doom and gloom, the perfect storm for stress in law enforcement. Your personality type, remember I talked about you come in with a certain personality, then we train you. We train you whether at the academy or wherever, we reinforce those drives that you have, the drive, the thrill, the drive to go into danger, and we teach you skills to survive those situations, so we reinforce it. Then your job, you're exposed to chronic and disturbing encounters, material, depending on your job, and so you learn how to use those skills, and it's kind of cool when you're able to, as sucky as it is of the things you're exposed to, you're feeling success and pride in implementing those new tactical skills that you have. So you start to experience satisfaction at work. As disturbing as it is, I often hear guys say, I'd rather be there than here. I'd rather be, even those of you that are here now, right in this room, I know your mind is up in Lewiston. You're half in here because the helplessness, you want to be there. And so you really that's where you find satisfaction. With that, when you're off duty, the skills that you learned, all the things that were reinforced, unfortunately, don't always translate well, and then you have more negative feedback at home, minimal successes. So you can see the divide starts where not doing great at home for whatever reason, your spouse is complaining about you, you're not home enough, you're getting really good feedback at work, and so the divide starts. And now you're overinvested in what feels good and familiar, which is your work and your job, which goes back to what Steve was saying in terms of the lack of balance and operational readiness. I made up these numbers. I haven't done research. I'd love to do research on truly what the investment is, but essentially, for most of you, and if this doesn't apply to you, if you have good balance, great. Tell us what you're doing. Tell me what you're doing. I learn, I am adding information to these slides in real time. Every time I talk to a law enforcement officer and they tell me, I'm like, that's a great idea. Can I use that in my slides? Whatever it is you're doing. So again, if you're already doing this, I'm generalizing. I get that, I'm generalizing, but if it doesn't apply to you, help me understand that you are doing well. So a lot of your time is invested in mission one, your job, because it feels good and it's familiar, even though it's crazy and disturbing and something no one else in this world understands, it's where you feel good. And then home and family, especially yourself, suffers. That would be the goal. It's never going to be perfect. Your job, you have little control, yet that's where you're overinvested. You have little control in your job, but that is where all your energy is. So it's no wonder that you guys feel stressed all the time because of that loss of control. Home and family, you have some control. You can't control how your spouse, children, or your partner, whatever you have, responds to your work. And then yourself, you actually have the most control how you take care of yourself, but that's sort of what's most neglected. Again, back to your personality types of serving others. So taking care of yourself is selfish, serving others is what you guys do. I'm preaching to the choir when I talk about the unique demands and stressors of your job, but I feel the need to share it, again, not maybe to get you to like us or to get you to know that we get it to the extent that we can. You're asked to perform effectively and efficiently in a high-risk, unpredictable situation. And by the way, there's the ever-present threat of danger and violence. We want you to maintain a tactical mindset. For those of you that are patrol officers, when you're approaching a car, there's a way you approach, standing back a little bit, making sure cars aren't hitting you. There's a whole choreography to it. That's a tactical mindset. Keeping your head on a swivel, like I said, the vigilance. Constantly exposed to difficult and disturbing encounters with the public or with some of the images or CSAM, it's just chronic. Again, repeated exposure to obscene and for a lot of you, web-based material. For those of you in this room who do undercover work, whether it's online or in person, you have to engage in behaviors that go against and violate your morals. That's not normal. Unpredictable hours, again, real time. I mean, these guys that are working the case right now, I don't know what their sleep is. I don't know how long they've been awake. For those of you who do specifically computer crimes, your reliance on technology, and some of the stuff I did get from UNH research, which is pretty awesome that I could incorporate that, but reliance on technology that is ever changing. And I don't know how many of you literally feel the pressure to save lives of victims, both externally. I met with some of the ICAC task force for the Maine State Police and just got a feel for what their experience was, and the millions of cyber tips coming in and the pressure to attend to all of them. And then if you're not, are you potentially, are you not saving that child because you didn't attend to that cyber tip? I just can't imagine that pressure. And then the internal, there's external pressure to solve a case, but there's also internal pressure. And literally your job is related to people living or dying, so there's that. Then I hear a lot of the case we missed or that never was. And Steve actually helped me with a concept. He named what I was describing, which is FOMO, or fear of missing out. Again, it's not being there currently, not being with your guys up north. Not being the case that, the operation that took place and you were home. Like, I get that that's sometimes more traumatizing than being at the case itself. Than not being there when you guys are so close and team players, that means a lot. I'm not gonna get into all the unique stressors with undercover work. That's a whole nother topic, but they're there. And then sleep deprivation on top of it. None of these things you're expected to perform effectively in a high-risk, unpredictable situation that's life-threatening on little sleep. So I talk a little bit more about sleep, where I say you're expected to perform flawlessly at the limit of human information processing in a physically demanding environment, and how sleep will deprive you, but yet you have so little sleep. And this research came from NASA and with Navy pilots, where they were looking at, now they have actually standards that pilots have to be down for a certain amount of time before they can fly again, but yet we don't have that in law enforcement, and the stakes are just as high. Just for some statistics, 17 hours awake, which is not abnormal, especially with what's going on now. I'm sure it's longer than that, but it's equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.05%, and then 24 hours awake, and this was research done by NASA, but is above the legal limit of drunk. So just the impact that sleep deprivation has can't go unrecognized. And I talk more later about, like, what do we do about that? The stakes are high. You're not flying a plane, but if you don't do all those things well, those demands I was talking about, if you don't do those things well, your tactical performance is impaired. A case could get thrown out. You can compromise your identity if you're undercover. There's investigations, injury, and of course someone could die. If you don't do your job right, someone could die. So what do we do to prepare you? Training, training, and more training. Anyone recognize that? Vassalboro, Maine Criminal Justice Academy, and those of you that are federal. I tried to include everybody. I don't know if I got everybody here, but, and the interesting thing about training is it capitalizes on your stress response. At the SEER school, specifically where I worked, it was a full immersive experience for the students, and it's called stress inoculation training. So they put them through role play, the students, academic first, then role play, and fully immersed in a training that's as real as possible. And it's like a crawl, walk, run. That the idea is that exposure to certain levels of stress over a gradual period, you will become inoculated, basically perform well in those stressful situations. And day one, what you couldn't do on day one, the students by the end were responding in ways that they never thought they could. And sometimes leaving that school, they'll say it was the best experience of their life because they couldn't have learned those skills elsewhere. So we're training you in your acute, utilizing your acute stress response, your fear response. We use that at your academies, and I know trainings are all different, but all of them use role play, scenario-based things. All of you, no matter what your job is, I'm pretty sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, goes through some kind of stress immersion experience to help you respond more effectively. I don't want to get into all the details in science. Again, I could talk about that all day, of the acute stress response, and I think Catherine, Celia, and Steve will probably talk more about the science, so I know they will. But everyone knows about flight, fight, or freeze response. Our body has these wonderful built-in primitive mechanism for responding to threats. It's pretty fascinating. It knows just what to do. But unfortunately, back in the day, it knew what to do to run away from a tiger to save your life, and then you go back to the cave where you could return to homeostasis in a safe place. So that stress response was needed to survive. And that stress response hasn't so much changed. It still does the same thing for you guys, but it results in, but we don't have the time to decompress. You don't have a cave. Maybe some of you have a man cave or something, but we don't have a cave to go to. In fact, your job requires you to be exposed to repeated stress over and over again. But the thing, in terms of performance, there are some things that happen in the acute stress response. While they're great for survival, they suck for a lot of other things. Fine motor skills, having a conversation, problem solving, making decisions, all your executive functioning. You've heard of tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, meaning you can't hear certain things because your body is preparing to focus on just the threat, and it's great. But the problem is that you're asked to perform in that state, and a lot of people have struggled with that. And so that is why we do stress inoculation training, to ensure that you're able to decide what weapon to use in a moment's notice and use it effectively, which is kind of a fine motor skill and a thinking skill. So asking you to problem solve, and you guys are really good at that. You guys are really good at that. Not because you were probably already like that, but also because we trained you to be that way. So in an acute state, your learning brain is gone, survival brain takes over, all those things can happen. And the goals of stress inoculation training is to make you perform better so that so when those things happen, you're not scared of it, you're not scared of your stress response, and you know what to do. You're like, oh yeah, this is the tunnel vision that happens, and this allows me as a sniper to be able to hit my target and whatnot. So and maybe your buddies know, like, don't come up and tap you on the back because you're not hearing anything else going on, and give you time for your body to come back down. So a lot of people have read Lieutenant Colonel or Colonel Grossman. He was a psychiatrist in the Army. He wrote On Combat and On Killing. A lot of law enforcement have read that. He talks about the warrior heart rate, and basically through stress inoculation training, we want you to be stressed enough that you're going to respond, but not overstressed that you freeze. And so the goal of training is to get you in that sort of 115 to 145 heart rate, which he calls like the warrior brain, and that's where we want you to be. And there's a whole other conversation about that again that we could have. But my point in saying that is, you're in flight or fight, we train you to function in that flight or fight. You guys don't get to come down. Normally you would come down and return to homeostasis. You guys don't get to because of the demands of your job. Even though you don't get to come down, your body wants to. Your body is trying to desperately over and over again. I call it the hunt for homeostasis. You don't get to come down, but you develop these things to feel like you're coming down. You're not choosing to, it's not like you're saying, oh, I need to come down. Maybe you are, but your body is naturally wanting homeostasis, so you engage in behaviors or things that are adaptive, that at least in the moment, but over time can be destructive, and that's the behaviors that we tend to see that we call self-destructive. So the things that work in the short term to make you feel just normal are things that can, over time, hurt you. What is psychological injury? So when we're talking about, like, what are the risks here? What are we talking about? And I just like to cover it for the sake of, because you guys have heard these words, by not helping you with this stuff. The risks are anxiety, depression, addiction, again, behaviors you engage in to feel normal. You hear PTSD. You hear that a lot, specifically for those who work in CSAM or in undercover. There's a paranoia and hypervigilance that's real, but that can continue when you're not on the job. Burnout. Jennifer talked a lot about burnout. That is a big risk. Moral injury, I'll talk more about, and suicide ultimately. So there's this idea for law enforcement that you don't fit neatly into any of those categories, that it's a series of different things that we're calling PTSD, but I mean, they've even come up with like emergency responder exhaustion syndrome. Like, it's not real, but we're trying to find a way to capture what it is you guys experience, and I don't think we have yet, but I think the fact that we understand it is what's important. Moral injury. You're gonna hear this a lot if you haven't heard it already, and this is essentially engaging, witnessing, bearing witness to things that violate your standards. And that is the thing that's gonna get someone in our office. This kind of experience where you didn't save someone, if you had just done this, that person wouldn't have died. And that questioning that you have, or it came from the military originally, this concept of, because of the rules of war, Geneva Convention, whatever, that having to dropping a bomb and hurting innocent people, but that was part of the mission and you had to do it. So that's a prime example of what moral injury is, the unintended consequences of doing your job. And you can imagine how that can weigh on you guys who your whole mission in life is to save others, not hurt them. So there's moral injury in war, and that's where the original kind of concept came from, but it's certainly apparent in law enforcement. There's so many stories. So that's, getting, and the biggest thing, it's not just, it's not being able, it's the helplessness, not being able to do something to save someone. The biggest one I hear though is, not that something you did or didn't do resulted in the harm of a teammate. That's what I hear. And when, like, even with the tactical team, it's like, if they shoot someone, it's not like they're like, oh, you shot someone, are you okay? It's when they miss the shot. That's what's traumatizing, because their job is to shoot someone for the purposes of safety. It's when they miss the shot. So we have to be mindful of, for these guys, what moral injury is, and it's anything that goes against your standards and morals that you're sitting with. I'm gonna just read a list. I mentioned that in real time, I'm sort of coming up with what your experiences are in law enforcement. I learn so much from you guys. and I would love for you to tell me what I missed, but I developed a list of like 40 different experiences that I believe are risk factors for ultimately psychological injury, if you will. And a lot of people think that you have to be sobbing in a corner crying or having these overt flashbacks that's what a risk factor is, when really it's these little things day to day that you don't recognize that could mean you're at risk. So I'm gonna read some, not all of them because that would take too long, although I want to, but I'll resist that urge. And if you kind of in your head, you don't have to say out loud, but if you answer yes to any of these, then just know that, just be mindful of that. There's nothing to do about it, but I believe it's my calling to be a law enforcement officer. And by the way, some of these are taken from other stress questionnaires that are out there, so I can't take full credit for it. I believe it's my calling to be a law enforcement officer. My identity is strongly tied to my work in law enforcement. So I'm gonna go through these in terms of, so this is specifically for work. Signs and symptoms that you might experience specifically with work, mission 1. I have limited opportunities to blow off steam with my guys, like Jennifer was talking about. The paperwork undermines my satisfaction with my work. I find it hard to protect a community that doesn't support us. I no longer find satisfaction or pride in my mission. I often feel like quitting work. I feel like I'm abandoning a victim if I don't close a case or follow every lead. I am bothered by the what ifs or should haves around certain cases. I'm ashamed of things I've seen and done on the job. Those are just some of them. When it comes to home and family, I hear this all the time. I hate people. I hate people. I mean, that's just what I hear all the time. I do not have patience for others. I'm suspicious of all other people, coaches, everybody. Everyone's a criminal. I prefer to be alone rather than socialize. When I do socialize, I'm not really there. I struggle to be present in the moment. It's hard to say no to family and friends without feeling guilty. You work so much that when you're off, it's like, of course I have to be involved. So that's another stress, that's another pressure. It's hard to say no because of the guilt you feel for working too much and potentially liking your job. I struggle to maintain a long-term relationship, or when I'm in one, my partner tells me I work too much. I am not comfortable asking my partner for me time because I'm gone so much. That would seem ridiculous. That's like, really, you're gonna ask for more time away when you've already been gone for 3 days? I'm constantly fighting with my partner. I'm told I'm insensitive and emotionally unavailable. That's a big one. I wish I were closer to my partner. My desire for intimacy, and that could be sexual, but that could be just connection, that could be affection, has changed. I feel guilty for how much I work. I find myself, we talked about I hate going to work, but then there's also, I actually find myself preferring work over family. Again, I'm more successful there. I want to be there. I feel more connected to my work friends than my own family. On the other hand, I believe I'm missing too much of my children and my family's lives. So those are some experiences you might feel in the social realm. And then for yourself, and these are all in the handouts in terms of all the questions. And again, please let me know, I think you should add this. This isn't a studied thing. This isn't research. I'd love to do research on people who answer yes to this are more at risk, but I don't have that yet or the resources to do that. Mission 3, again, I hate people. Most things annoy me. I easily fly off the handle. I've been told I'm too negative or cynical. I don't trust people. I have trouble seeing the good in the world. I keep my head on a swivel. I'm skeptical of conferences like these and people like us. Maybe coming here but begrudgingly, or maybe not. My sleep sucks. Even when I have the opportunity for sleep, it still sucks. What we'll know about trauma affecting sleep. I experience vivid dreams or nightmares. I'm always thinking 10 steps ahead. You guys are the best people to go camping with and do anything with because you're preppers, you think 10 steps ahead, and that's great. But again, that anticipatory mindset that you need prevents you and robs you of being present in the moment. But to you, it's a really big deal. Like you're like, I packed the whole car up and I brought all these gadgets. That's really good, right? And your spouse is like, I'd rather you have just been here and focused on here and now. Trouble sitting still, obsessing about details of a task. I have high expectations for myself. You strive for perfection. I mean, that's kind of your personalities to begin with. I lose interest in activities that aren't thrilling or exciting. I don't find much pleasure in activities I used to enjoy. I don't have many hobbies outside of work. I switch off at the end of the day, like Steve was talking about. I check out not just myself, I check out on everything. The only way I can wind down is through alcohol or other substances. I have a lot of avoidance behaviors, like something happened at this particular place, and so now you don't even drive by that place, so that's an avoidance behavior. You guys who do law enforcement have lots of triggers. You avoid a lot of things. I blame myself for so much that has gone wrong in my life. And there's so many more, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that what we're talking about in terms of psychological risk isn't big and grand. Sometimes it's just these little things and ways of thinking that could be impactful to your mental health. I just thought of this when I was doing a ride-along with a state trooper. We were going through, I thought, again, not being from here, it was a countryside of Biddeford. I don't know if that makes sense, but it felt like the countryside. There were some rolling hills. And I remember coming upon a beautiful farmhouse, and I was just about to say how beautiful it was when he said, yep, drug takedown there, DV there. And I was like, how do you live here? How do you do this? So have any of you seen, I just gave it away, Stranger Things? If you haven't or have, I don't know. It's kind of a sci-fi thing, but there's this beautiful suburban community, and then there's something called the Upside Down, which is a dark and evil place. Same community, but it's like literally flipped upside down, and it's all evil. And the first thought I had was, you like live in the Upside Down, where we see this, welcome to Maine, the way life should be. You guys see welcome to Hawkins, which is the town that I'm describing. We see, tourists see this, and you see that. You see this. It's not like magical, I don't think. You see that. I don't blame you. You have to. That's what makes you a good police officer. I don't want you to miss those details or those scary things, because I want you to keep us safe. But how does that translate to your life? I took this from Dr. Gil Martin. He does a thing where he when you see these things, what do you guys see? I know what you see when you see those names. I don't need to say it. I know what you're thinking. That's not normal. It makes sense, but that's not normal. I'm not going to do that clip because it's a clip from I'm not going to do that clip today. It's something I usually show. It's from American Sniper, which was a true story about a sniper, a Navy SEAL, who did struggle when he came home with adjusting and PTSD and ultimately sought help. Didn't turn out so well for him, but the video, the reason I show it is because it's a classic case of what hypervigilance looks like at home, where his wife's talking and he's literally just, the threats are all around him and his head's turning. You can even the movie kind of shows like the auditory exclusion piece. It's like muffled, the background's muffled, his wife's just talking, and he's not really listening. So I love that, but also part of that video has some gunshots and things that I didn't want to share today. It's too raw. So the other thing I wanted to say that I didn't, I'm almost done, is that I get being a military psychologist is not the same as law enforcement. And one of the biggest things I've seen, and I still don't know how you guys do this, is that in the military, sure, we deploy 6 months to a year at a time. It sucks, but it's gone, you're gone, and literally your bills are taken care of, your family's taken care of by the Navy, everything's taken care of at home. Your only job is to do your mission, and we're there. And then we get to come back, but we get to spend a week in Kuwait where we decompress, and we do fun things, and we do nothing but rest and relaxation. You guys are on the job and go home every night. I don't understand that. I don't know what we do with that. Well, I'd like to believe I have some ideas. that we're going to talk about later today. But you guys are going in and out of the battlefield every night. And I still don't understand that, and I still want to show you how much I appreciate that dissonance. And so hopefully we can talk later about that. That is all I have for now. Thank you for letting me speak to you and being up here, and I really appreciate you being here today.